Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. Our title for the episode today is The Hidden Hassles of Real Estate, Why Note Investing Might Be Your Next Smart Move. And so I want to start off with this. If you've ever owned rental properties or considered diving into real estate, you know the appeal, but behind the allure, there's all these nightmares, calls, disputes, climate change, busted pipes. So today's guest, Tom Force. He's actually a retired American Airlines pilot, and he is actually a real estate investor, but now he's turned into note investing. I'm really happy to have him on the show to talk about this area of investing as an alternative, and really happy to have him to add value to the audience. So, Tom, welcome.
Chris, thanks for having me on, man. It's a pleasure and an honor. I'm happy to reach out to your audience today because I think we share a lot in common. And as you alluded to in the opening, I've made a lot with my retirement as far as trying to live the retirement lifestyle without the lifestyle headaches of tenants, toilets, and everything else that goes along with traditional real estate investing. So I'm happy to share what I've learned with your audience today.
Yeah, I love that quote, tenants, toilets, and trash.
Yeah.
But yeah, start off by introducing yourself. And, we talked about kind of the hassles, but talk about what you do now and we'll dive into the questions.
Sure. Just by background, I grew up in New York, went to Notre Dame on an electrical engineering scholarship, but I was on an Air Force ROTC scholarship and flew in the Air Force for 13 years. I was a pilot for American Airlines for 35 years, just retired this past June. But as is the case, I think a lot with your audience as well as mine, your career can be over very quickly. I like to play ball with my boys, get hit in the eye, and my flying career is done. Same with your audience. It doesn't take much to have a disability that won't allow you to practice. So always had a plan B looking, and real estate always appealed to me. So I'm very experienced in the ups and downs of rental real estate. I've done land development. I've invested in syndications, which is tough right now because with the way mortgage rates have gone up, multifamily has been difficult on people. So both my boys are real estate agents, and so very active in the real estate community. So just to get right to the punchline, back in January of 2021, when we were going through that lovely COVID thing, and that was affecting my industry with the vaccine mandates, all that stuff. My wife and I had just finished our last flip here in Texas. I'm in the North Texas area now is where we've been for about 30 years. And we had a nice profitable flip. I'm 62 now at that point. And I'm like, man, we do a lot of work ourselves and I just can't see this being a lifestyle going forward. I can't travel the world and be fixing. And it's tough to get crews when you're not a big operator. So we're looking forward to I really wanted passive income, but I don't like the stock market. We can go up and down on that for a while, but I don't have the time. I've lived through the crash of 87, 2000. But one little point, when you get to my age, you have people, financial advisors, once you come out to dinner, they give you the free steak dinner, come out, look at my presentation. But that graph, I always show from 2000 to 2013, if I retired in 2000 and I woke up in 2013, my money would be right about the same. And I would have had to live off that. So timing has a lot to do with it. And I want to be in control. And I think your audience is the same way. We want to be in control of our retirement. So happened to be right about that time, middle of 2021, I found out about note investing. I was listening to a podcast similar to yours, and the guest was a longtime note investor. In fact, he ran a school about note investing, and he's right here in my backyard in Texas. And I'm like, man, when I heard about this, I was like, where have I been before? And so just to break it down very simply, note investing, what we're doing is we're buying the paper part of the transaction. Anybody who's bought a property knows that usually there's a mortgage on it. Normally the bank owns that mortgage, but those mortgages trade on the open market and they can be created by banks. They can be created by people who are selling their home. It's called seller financing. Okay. So instead of actually owning the physical property and collecting payments from a tenant, the landlord or the homeowner pays me, just like the bank. And so it's the paper part of the transaction. So I've been doing that for about 3 years. When I started in 2021, I had a goal for a certain amount of passive income in 3 years when the government forces me to retire at 65. I hit that income goal in 2 years, and now I'm just leveraging what I have to even more cash flow. So that's how notes work, and I've written a book on it, talk about my journey to financial freedom and the preface there. And I'm happy to share all this with your audience. It's a small community we're in. Everybody's all big about the rentals and the apartments and all that, and they're out there struggling. but we're like the best kept secret. But I'm looking forward to having more people to work with, and it's worked well for me. So I enjoy sharing. I have a podcast, and that's what I do in retirement. And I'm helping my sons learn about that part of the business and share with other people too, who don't really, what do you invest in these days? So that's the whole story.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think you and me, we can resonate. Like, I can remember like going on, like right before my plane's about to take off, I get a call that like a AC is broken or a tenant's locked out or just something ridiculous. And
Yes.
or just getting like a 12 a.m. phone call about a toilet. It's just really ridiculous things. And but so it's in as we grow older, it's less and less like we want to be able to leverage versus sweat. And so one thing is talking about is these real estate notes and how does it work? Like, what are the key types of real estate notes? I know there's performing, non-performing first and
Right.
second. What is deciphered and what is best for a beginner?
Okay. I wouldn't say there's one best one, but I want to make sure I make it clear right off the bat. But one great thing about note investing is you don't have to invest in your own neighborhood, in your area. I'm here in Texas. I have about 40 notes and they're scattered all across the country because I don't have to worry about the paper. I don't have to visit the property. I don't ever have to fix anything up. So you can invest in the areas that you feel comfortable in. So basically there are four types of notes. You've got residential homes, which is the most common. You've got commercial notes, which would be, your apartment complexes or other commercial buildings. You've got land notes, which are pretty popular here in Texas. We've got a lot of those. And then there are other notes on certain things that you might consider in between, like mobile homes, things like that. By far, the most popular are the single family residences, because that's what everybody's familiar with. But seller financing and notes on land are very popular. Those are the two that I dabble in. So when you mention the different types of notes, we all hope that they all start off as performing mortgages. And what that simply means is you're paying as agreed. So, Chris, you go out, you buy a home, and it's a nice home. You put a down payment down, and about 4 to 6 weeks later, you have to make that first mortgage payment, and you will go ahead and you will continue to make that payment till one of two things happens. Either you pay it off or you sell the property. And then we find that people tend to sell their property anywhere from about 8 to 10 years is what we expect. What happens when they become non-performing, they start to slip into a little bit of disarray when it comes to payments. They start to miss that first payment and second payment. And if they stop paying altogether after about 3 to 4 months, it varies by state, we start a collection process. And varying by the state, it could go for a while, but people get afraid of investing in notes because of that. But actually, I can explain as we go further on why that's actually not a bad thing as a note holder. The bank doesn't worry about it. And really, when you look at yourself as the bank as a note holder, we have ways to work things out that are actually good for everybody. So that's how a performing note becomes a non-performing note, because they're not paying as agreed. And if they can't come to any kind of agreement on how to take care of the arrears, then a couple things can happen. The person can walk away and just give the keys back like a rental, or you go through the full foreclosure process. And either way, the lender now owns what's called an REO, a real estate owned property, where they own the title, and then they can go back and do what they want with it. You put it back on the market, put a tenant in, or actually what a lot of my contemporaries do is they'll sell it with seller financing and create another note to get the cash flow going.
Yeah. And the other question I have for you is how does real estate note investing differ from tax lien investing?
Yeah, so that's one of the questions that comes up every once in a while. Your audience is probably familiar with tax lien investing, and that what you're doing in that case, if I'm not mistaken, because I haven't looked at that in quite a while, but I know here in Texas, what you're doing is paying the taxes on somebody else's behalf. And you're getting a right to that particular property because the municipalities, they need that tax base paid because they have to keep up the municipal services. So what you're doing is you're looking for those taxes that are in arrears, and you're basically putting a lien on the property by paying those taxes. And so if the property is ever sold, you get that money back plus a certain amount of payback. But if it continues too far, you can actually take possession of the property through a tax sale foreclosure, as far as I understand it. So a lot of states are different. I know in Texas, there's a 2-year right of redemption, which means you don't quite own the property for a couple of years. So it's a way to play in it's a way to play in the defaulted note game, kind of. In other words, you're going and Somebody has to get in trouble before you can go ahead and act. It doesn't always work out for you, but I mean, it is profitable. It's a way to get in that business. But what we do, we simply buy our way into being the position of the bank, and we actually work with our borrowers to make sure that they stay, on track. And 95% of my note borrowers are people who, pay every month on time. And one thing I want to emphasize as well before I forget, you're probably familiar in the rental real estate game with property management, where if you don't want to deal with the headaches directly, you have a property manager and you give them 10% and they, we have a vacancy, they'll look for another tenant, you pay them. It's expensive. It's 10% of the rent. Okay. In the note business, we have what's called a loan servicer. And so when I get a note, I do what's called boarding it with a loan servicer, and they interact with the borrower. I'll let you know a little secret. None of my borrowers know who I am. We never talk. I never call them. They're not knocking on my door. They're not waking me up at night. If there's an issue, if somebody gets behind, they're calling the servicer, and the servicer does the work out with them. The servicer escrows the money for the taxes. They do all the work. I literally just get a check or an ACH every month, and it's a lot of fun. So it's a much more enjoyable, predictable way of business, which I think is what your audience is after. Predictable cash flow. I can look at my Excel spreadsheet here on my other screen, and I know next month what's coming in. And my wife and I can go on vacation, and I'm not going to get any phone calls. So it's really an ideal hands-off business, and I'm so glad I found it.
Yeah. And there's so many questions that we won't be able to fit in this 30-minute time frame.
Sure.
But the other question I have for you is this it sounds like more of a passive form of investing. And what is a typical return on investment for note investing? And how does it compare to owning rental properties, flipping houses, as well as syndications?
Fantastic. And just so you know, if at the end of the broadcast, we still have questions, I do a Tuesday night webinar every week, and we cover a lot of this stuff. So I know this is really new for a lot of your audience, so they're going to be, what's going on? So I do have resources at the end that'll cover this. So comparing to rental real estate, everybody seems to know that. So let me start by saying what my notes return, what I'm looking for. There's two ways that people employ, let's just talk about residential notes for right now. There is the performing note and the non-performing note. Now, when I started, I just wanted cash flow. I basically bought cash flow. When I bought a note, I would look at a note. There's ways of doing due diligence that aren't that difficult, but I was looking at the borrower's propensity to pay. And I do that by looking at the servicer's notes. It tells me their pay history, and especially if they paid through COVID, it's a solid note. I'm looking at the equity in the property, because if the borrower defaults, I want to know what I'm getting back in foreclosure if it goes that far. And all my notes have a solid equity. Generally, I invest at about 55% investment to value of the property. If I buy a note at, say, $85,000, the property's worth at least $150,000. So I have a solid backstop in case something goes wrong. And if we have time later, we'll talk about the workout options if they don't pay. So generally, on a longer term note, let's say that I'm looking for one that has 20 to 30 years left of payments, I'm generally looking at about 1% per month return of what I invested. And so a perfect example of that is the first note I ever bought was on a little home in Georgia. Somebody had bought it out of foreclosure. They went and fixed it up, and they found a buyer for it. And the fix and flipper actually held the note for a while. So he actually became the bank. And then it went onto the marketplace, and it was I paid $88,000 for that note. The unpaid balance, which I would be collecting, was $110,000. The property was worth $149,000, and I get back about $870 a month. So the key takeaways there is I invested $88,000, and I collect $874 for the next, I think, 22 and a half years. That's how that works. Okay. Now now each note's a little different. If the term is longer, you'll probably find that you'll get a little bit less than 1% because of the time value of money. But I've invested in shorter term notes now because I'm getting older now. I do a lot of investing in my IRAs. And so I've got 10 years between now and my required minimum distributions. So I'm kind of laddering notes. People know about laddering CDs. So now I'm filling in as I make money with my longer term notes. I'm buying shorter term notes. And so it's not unusual. I bought one on a property in Michigan, and the balance was about $80,000. I paid about 65,000. It only has about 6 years of payments, but I'm getting back about $1,600 a month. So the key concept here, the key takeaway, I actually did a whole podcast episode on this, is called the velocity of your money, which allows me to segue into what you're talking about with rental real estate. Because with notes, I'm getting my money back very quickly. And so it's kind of like an ATM. That money keeps kicking out. And when I get a big enough little pile again, I go buy another note. And then I buy another note. And so you're leveraging it on and on. The typical things that I hear about with rental real estate, and I've been out there, my son actually owns a property management company. So I have my finger on the pulse of what's going on. The 1% rule used to be what everybody looked for, but 1% of what you spent on it. But I don't know about your area, but these days, there's things out of your control that keep that from happening. Insurance rates everywhere, even in Florida. And Florida is the worst one. But insurance rates and taxes just going up and up right now. I do an example on my podcast where in Dallas, let's say you had $250,000 to invest in cash. You can buy a typical rental home for cash, or you can buy a note. So like I said, if I invested $250,000, I would expect to get back about $2,500 a month, maybe a little more, a little less. That rental home, generally we found, and this is verified by one of the major brokerages out there, just not me making it up off the top of my head, you're going to average about $800 a month cash coming back. And when you think about, that's not even something you can count on, because if you're counting on it, that's the month that the hailstorm is going to come and take out your roof or some other things going on. The other thing that people always say is you're missing out on the appreciation. And honestly, when you study it, and your folks are smart, and you can sit here and look at the math, when you look at the ability to reinvest the cash flow quickly over time, it becomes much more attractive. And I don't know, getting $2,500 a month for 20, 30 years by stroking one check versus having to manage this property and go through all the hassles and worrying about people destroying my property, just so 30 years from now, I can have a 40-year-old house that's paid off, and then I'd have to sell it to get my money out of it. And then I got to pay capital gains and all the other things that go into it. It just becomes a crapshoot. And I know there's a lot of tax breaks with rental of real estate, which are beyond the scope of what we talk about. You have to have a taxable income to, it's just the same with syndications. You mentioned syndications, and I've been in syndications. My son has gotten me in some as well. And lately, I'm just happy to get my money back because a lot of things have gone wrong. But the other thing, Chris, about that is, you have no control. You write a check and you have no control. I can't leverage that. Notes are very liquid. If I need money, I can put those on the marketplace and have money in about 7 days. I can use them as collateral for a loan. There's all sorts of ways to get your money back out of them. But it's a loss of control with the multifamily. I always tell my audience, I said, I can't go to the syndicator and say, hey, break me off one of them apartment doors so I can go to Whole Foods. So Anyway, you can tell I'm passionate about having found this, and I'm experiencing the other things. There's good aspects of all of the other disciplines of real estate. It's just for my position in life and for what I want to do, which is not much except travel, this suits me really well.
Yeah. And I know we have 4 minutes remaining. And
okay,
one thing I wanted to ask you is what are the downfalls? Like, what do people have to be aware of, and where can people find these notes? Is it on a platform, or talk about that?
Yeah, there's a couple ways. So just like anything else, sometimes a little bit of knowledge of it can hurt yourself a little bit too much. There are platforms out there where novice note buyers put notes out there, and they're just trying to unload them. They've just written a note on a house they've sold, and the borrower may not have been perfectly qualified. We teach, if you're going to sell your house on seller financing, the buyer, you should qualify them with a registered mortgage loan originator, not just the first person you could fog a mirror coming off of Craigslist. So one of the big pitfalls is people who create notes where the borrower already has an iffy credit situation, and that devalues the note, not getting a good down payment. What I want to see as a note buyer, I want to see a solid down payment history. In other words, they don't just have $1,500 to get in. That's like a renter. You want to see them have monetary and emotional equity in the property. You want to look at the property, it looks nice, maybe some flowers in the flower box, It doesn't look like a meth lab. People are paying on time. They put a decent amount of money in it. And so they want to stay in the property. I want to see a good amount of equity there because if something happens, we want to make sure we're protected. I never really got to the workout options, but sometimes people go through bad stretches. And unlike the banks, I'm willing to work with them. They just say, hey, my husband lost his job. We're down to one income. Maybe it's time to modify the loan. We'll keep them in it. And I know all sorts of stories where that we can be compassionate in this business. They may want to just say, hey, we can't afford anymore. Can we just give you the keys and walk? And if there's equity on it, just go ahead and sell the property. Okay. If it comes down to foreclosure, because I've bought the note properly at a discount from what it's worth, as far as the property's worth, I'll always come out ahead. But yeah, there's platforms out there. I buy from a couple of local hedge funds that I'm affiliated with because it's like I can buy notes like a car off of Craigslist, or I can go to CarMax where it's been checked out. So I work with some people who float. So there are some pitfalls. We talk all about this on my website, and I'd love to have your guys and gals be able to check out what I'm talking about. I don't sell anything. We just exchange the information, just like you're getting the information out to your folks today. And that'd be a good place to go for a continued conversation. It was okay with you guys.
Yeah, we will need to have you as a part two because there's so many questions around this, and I really want the audience to just know about there's this field. Because everybody was like, yeah, rental real estate or physical real estate is a pain. So going to syndications, and people got burned in syndications. So it's time to expand your horizons. And
absolutely, I would love that.
Yeah. How can people find out about you and reach out to you, connect with you?
Probably the best place, Chris, is to go to my website. It's noteclubusa.com. There's 3 words, noteclubusa.com. Like I said, I'm not selling anything there. We talk about my journey on there. I have a lot of videos and resources on there. The biggest trade show in notes in the country is called Note Expo. I won Investor of the Year in 2022, and I just got it again last week. So I do know what I'm talking about, but I present notes in a way that everybody can understand. And that would be a great place to start. And it would be nice if they went to my podcast, or they can go to my Tuesday evening webinars. I do a live webinar every Tuesday night. And I think the information on that is on my website as well. Or they can, if they want, they can email me directly. Very simple. My first name is swim@noteclubusa.com. Love talking about notes. Love helping people get started. And we have some resources on there for education where they can find out all they want. And I'm here to help them out if they want to get some more information beyond that.
Awesome.
And the other thing, I've got access to some quality notes. So if they're ready to take the next step, and I can help them find what they need to do to go forward.
Excellent. I really enjoyed this conversation, and keep up the great work.
Absolutely. Look forward to coming back anytime, and look forward to taking care of your people. This has worked really well for me. And I just love to have as many people as possible have the same feeling.